Okay, let's get started. Happy Friday. Hope you're doing well. This class is going to be a little bit different. We are going to have a practice short essay question in just a little bit. So we'll be working through that question, giving you some time on your own to work on that, and then talking about what we would be looking for in that question to help you to prepare and do well for the midterm exam. As a quick recap, last class we talked about nonverbal communication. We talked about both types of nonverbal communication and the functions. Being able to differentiate between those two is going to be important for your Canvas prompt if you haven't done this week's Canvas prompt already. So I definitely recommend looking through that. Also, for those of you who were not here on Wednesday, we went over the study guide for the midterm exam that's available on Canvas that goes over all of the terms and concepts that you need to know for the midterm exam. And we also went over the practice questions that are available for you. So you're welcome to refer to those, and I'm happy to give you feedback on your practice questions so that you know what I would be giving you as a grade on this. So for today, I'm going to dedicate about 20 minutes for you to work on a practice short essay question, which you could either write or type, but it'll simulate the amount of time and work that you would be doing on those short essay questions on the exam. We'll talk about elements of verbal and nonverbal communication that could be used to address this question in an effective way. And then I'm going to be asking you in groups to work through an article that talks a little bit about elements of verbal and nonverbal communication. So if you checked on Canvas, I sent out an announcement right before class that includes a link to this article and also sent out on the front page of Canvas that article as well. So for today's practice question, I'm asking you to type or write this question for your attendance credit for today. So you can choose of those two which is easiest for you. And again, this is a simulation and approximation of the types of questions you should expect for the short essay portion of your midterm exam. Yes?
You want us to completely write down a question, just write A, B.
So you do not need to write like the question itself in your response, right? So you can use the numbers or letters in your response. So you do not need to word for word write down the question itself. But I am looking for you to write a complete answer to that question. So this question is about verbal and nonverbal communication, which we have been talking about this week. So A, in your own words, what are the key differences between verbal and nonverbal communication? I'm asking you to clearly define those in your answer. B, pick a theory that we've talked about so far in the quarter. How does this theory relate to both verbal and nonverbal communication? And then lastly, C, one of the challenges of nonverbal communication is that it can be ambiguous and hard to understand. Give an example of a form of ambiguous nonverbal communication that could prevent a message from being understood, and making sure to explain that function. So I will give you 20 minutes to work through the parts to this question. We'll talk about that question together afterwards. It's about 10:03, so we'll take until about 10:23 for you to work on this question. I'll let you know when you have 10 minutes and then 5 minutes. You have 10 minutes remaining. You have 5 minutes remaining. One more minute. And time. Please pass forward or email me your responses. right. So finger poll, 1 being very easy, 5 being very difficult. How challenging did you find it to be to complete this question in this amount of time? Okay. Some 2s, some 3s, some 1s. So seems like for a lot of people, this was pretty straightforward, not too difficult to do. That's good. This would be, again, an example of the type of question you should expect to see on the exam. Also, this is the amount of time you should expect, right? Because it's 25 multiple choice and 3 short essays. You can pick 3 problems out of 4. So you would probably allocate about 20 minutes to each of those. So this gives you a sense of what to expect in the response. Again, I don't expect as much detail or explanation compared to the way that you would answer one of the Canvas prompts in the class, but I think this will help you to know what to expect going in. So let's talk about this question and break down what helps this response be a strong one. So the use of verbal and nonverbal communication. So what is a major difference between verbal and nonverbal communication?
Words.
Right. So words are a really key element here. So remember, verbal communication is communication that is involving the use of language and spoken word or written word, right? So verbal communication could be sending a text, or it could be talking with somebody face to face, right? So what I'd be looking for is a clear definition of what those things are, drawing from your knowledge of those terms from the study guide. So that's pretty straightforward. A theory that we've discussed so far in the quarter, right? So we've gone over several different theories that relate to some of these ideas in interpersonal communication. How many people selected uncertainty reduction theory? Okay. How many selected Maslow's hierarchy of needs? How many had some difficulty coming up with the theory? What other theories were folks able to use? Oh, how many people selected muted group theory? Okay, a couple of you. What were other theories that people were able to incorporate here? So if I did not name your theory, which one did you choose? I will hold an awkward silence until I get an answer. So which theory did you choose for this part of prompt? So we talked about uncertainty reduction. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy, talked about muted group. What other theories? Yeah.
Do all 3 points, A, B, and C?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
The essay, okay.
I was thinking that we were most dollars today.
Yeah. I thought we were gonna pick one.
Well, now we know for the exam.
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah, so for clarification, right? The essay questions are divided into parts, right? So each question would have these 3 different parts.
It makes more sense now. but-
Okay, yes.
No wonder I had enough time for that.
Yeah. I wrote the
All
whole
right.
page.
Gotcha. So there were folks who did not have an answer because they didn't, okay. Yeah, this is a practice short essay question, so not plural. Yes, so the questions would include these 3 different parts. The example short essay questions that are linked on Canvas also show those 3 different parts too, right? So if we were to look at those, right? Similarly, this is a practice short essay question with these 3 different parts. This is a practice short essay question with these 3 different parts. So I apologize for the confusion on the parts of the question. I should have been a bit more clear about.
Again, this is the learning here than on the.
Sure. Yeah. But yes, so you would want to address all three parts of the question, right? So verbal and nonverbal communication is pretty straightforward and easy to answer. Identifying a theory would take a little bit more to explain and talk about. And then this is kind of building off of that to discuss some of the challenges of nonverbal communication, right? So one of the challenges is that nonverbal communication can be ambiguous. So sometimes the message is not fully understood because of the use of nonverbal communication, right? So one example of this is that if somebody were to kind of like smirk or smile as they're looking at their phone, right? It's not necessarily that they're responding to you when you're talking to them, but maybe there's something funny that showed up on their phone that they are giving a nonverbal response to. So that would be an example of ambiguity in nonverbal communication. Talked about some of these categories. Again, these are the different ways that we can mentally sort nonverbal communication. So you might consider in a response like this one, incorporating those categories. And then we also talked about functions of nonverbal communication last class, and I asked you to share some of those functions. What is nonverbal communication designed to do? So thinking about the fact that this question, right, included those three different parts, you might think about how addressing fully those parts of the question might take a little bit longer for you. So I'd encourage you to consider modulating your response with that in mind. If you're looking for extra practice, you might try that question again on your own, addressing those different parts. And then you might also think about what kind of concepts or ideas that were present in those questions that you wanted to go back into review. So again, some examples of theories that you could incorporate in your responses. One of them is the idea of muted group theory, that you have a dominant and a muted group, and that the ability for a dominant group to control and dictate language would be an example of how dominant groups could establish control. You could use that to describe how certain forms of nonverbal communication, like shaking a head or using eye contact, right, are oftentimes defined in the context of a dominant group. Another example here, right, is this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, talking about this sort of way that we would use verbal and nonverbal communication to fulfill needs that you can use in response. And then uncertainty reduction theory that we talked about during the first week of class is the idea of us trying to address and deal with those elements of uncertainty in our lives. So that would be ways that you could incorporate theories into your responses. Another example of theory that you could utilize is Carl Rogers' idea of self-concept, right? Thinking about self-worth and ideal self and incorporating those elements. So those things could work as responses to the problem too. So what I'd like us to do is take some time in groups, and in each group, I'd like there to be at least one person who has access to a device like a phone or laptop that can help other people who are not able to access a device themselves. So before class, I sent out an invite to a link to an article that you can read. I also have that listed on the front page of Canvas. And what I would like you to do in your groups is to take some time to look through this article and take note of some of the things that you're noticing about verbal and nonverbal communication. So how are those things being talked about and addressed? We'll take some time for you to work through that, and then we will report on this article and some of the ideas from this article together. So let's do groups of 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So please take some time to move over to your groups, chat about and read through this article, and we'll talk about that together. Give groups about 5 more minutes to discuss what you're noticing, and then I'll ask groups to report on what they're noticing to our class overall. Any groups who would like some more time? Okay. So let's talk about this article together. So I'd like us to hear from each group in terms of what the general insights or observations your group noticed were, particularly as they relate to verbal and nonverbal communication. So let's start here with this group in the back corner. What were some things that you noticed from the reading?
Well, it talks about how you can't see someone with can't tell whether they're confused or understanding.
Yeah. Right, the inability to visually see people who have cameras off in something like a Zoom meeting is challenging, right? It speaks to the way that we use those visual cues like facial expression to make sense of communication. One thing that's especially common if we're doing, for instance, a phone call with video off is that we really try to use things like pauses and nonverbal emphasis of things in a much more deliberate way. We oftentimes tend to make pauses and methods of breaking things up a little bit more dramatic to really sell those points a bit more. But in the group back here, what were some things that you all noticed?
The article also had that during the pandemic, workers had education on the screen.
Uh-huh.
So they also, it's part of the
right? So this article is really breaking down the switch to virtual platforms that we saw kind of en masse in the context of COVID-19, and the ways that that switch meant that there was just gaps in information that could have been conveyed non-verbally in a face-to-face interaction. How about the group in the back on the side?
Yes, I guess I'd like to. About how nonverbal.
Uh-huh. Right. So a really big element of our nonverbal communication is the use of proxemics, how close or far you are from other people. And when you have a screen that's completely flat, right, the ability to convey nonverbally in that manner is a lot more challenging, but also our ability to read and understand somebody who's speaking in this flat plane, right? It's harder for things like gestures and facial expressions to pop in the same way. How about this group here in front?
So we talked about basically like there's too much ambiguity, like where people assume that people know the information or like where it's located. And a lot of people don't think about like their peripheral participation. And also there can be like Wi-Fi or connection issues. So that people are like cutting each other off or talking at the same time, and people like hesitate to speak because they like don't want to be rude.
Right. Oftentimes in a group and one-on-one setting, we have the opportunity to understand through nonverbal cues when somebody should be speaking or jumping into a conversation. But it's almost like the standoff you have in a four-way intersection when you're trying to initiate conversation in something like a Zoom meeting. Some efforts to try to mitigate that have been doing things like having a hand raise option in virtual meetings. But again, we use those nonverbal cues to try to figure out when it's appropriate to participate in conversation. So I think that speaks to the power and influence of nonverbal communication. How about here on the side?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about was like with Zoom meetings and things like that, you can only see like the upper half on people's faces. And how
Yeah.
it kind of takes away like gestures and other things, like other forms of nonverbal communication, so you can't really fully understand what that person's saying. And then like when you're in a Zoom meeting, you can't see their face if they are understanding what you are saying.
So I saw a meme going around that were people who were dressing up as if they were like face-to-face, but how they would dress up for a Zoom meeting. It was everybody in like business and formal attire, and then just wearing like pajama pants, right? The way that we like present within a small space, well, the bottom half of our bodies, right? Our clothing, the way that we might move our legs or pace around, right? Those are things that we do pick up on to some extent. So losing out on some of those parts in that box is useful. So I wanted to share this article because I think that it adds to our discussion about why verbal and nonverbal communication matter. In something like an essay question, you might think about some of these ideas and examples that came up in this article, or even think back to your own experiences with virtual meetings that I'm sure many of you have had to do for a very long time. So I apologize for the confusion about the short essay question. If you only answered one of the three parts of the response, that will not impact your credit on that. And one thing that I'll do to help to clarify on the exam itself is I'll say, rather than ABC, I'll say part A, part B, part C, so that you know that that corresponds to that question. If you would like me to give you feedback on the short essay question that you did for today, just send me an email and I'm happy to let you know how you would score, what you would do on that question. But if you want to either submit your response to this question or one of those two practice Canvas questions, I'm happy to turn that around to you. So remember, we've got the midterm coming up in just under 2 weeks. We talked about verbal and nonverbal communication and some of the ways that things like virtual spaces complicate and add to how we understand those things. So next week, we'll be focusing on culture. So have a great weekend. If you're traveling, have good luck with your travels, and I'll see you soon.